Hello and welcome to the Intentional Wealth Update from Morton Brown Family Wealth for the first week of January 2023. Katie, Happy New Year. How are you?
Hi, Happy New Year. Good, how are you? I
Good.
have to admit you jump started there. I didn't realize we were going, but here we are.
Oh,
Let's
we're,
go.
we're leaving. That's how this year's going to happen. It's going to happen quickly and unexpected, unlike last year, which was totally predictable. So, all right. So we had a long conversation leading up to this about resolutions, New Year's resolutions, and why we don't like them, right?
Yeah, I have to admit I'm not the biggest fan of New Year's resolutions. I feel like they seem like this dramatic change. I'm going to commit to this thing and I'm gonna accomplish this thing and that's good. I think it's good to have goals, but sometimes the dramatic change are is difficult to keep the effort going. Whereas I like to think of things as kind of more incrementally. How do I tweak this? How do I get a little better here and a little better there and set those good habits going forward?
Yeah, yeah. And coming out of 2022, which was just a really dramatic year for investors in a lot of ways, people feeling a lot of turmoil here. We just wanted to pause here, take a minute and talk about how we reflect on a year like last year. What kinds of ways can we think about the year to come in a way that's constructive for investors? We got into this idea of the path of least resistance, and there's no one right now who's feeling like we're on the path of least resistance. It wasn't easy last year. So, what if we called this the lessons on the path of resistance? I mean, this is where the learning happens when things are in turmoil and change and everything else. So, why don't we start there with kind of talking about last year, wrapping up the equity markets down across the board for the most part. There was no place to hide from a downward shift in markets, but there was some nuance to it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Last year was a good reminder. I think, especially coming off of the years leading up to it, it was a good reminder that US stocks are not always going to be the outperformers. US and international stocks for a long time, they kind of toggled in step with one another. But we ended up the year with the Russell 3000 down 19.2% and the EFI, the international markets, down 14.5%. So that's a pretty wide spread there. And I think it really started to show up more toward the end of the year. I mean, if we look at fourth quarter returns, we had positive returns in the US, which is great at about 7%, but international markets were up 17%. So
Yeah.
it's that reminder, that diversification and how large of a role that plays over the long term when we kind of blend all of this together.
Yeah. And then on the bond side, which we acknowledge is one of the lesser understood aspects of your investment portfolio. But on the bond side, we've had very few negative years in the past, but you had, 10-year treasuries that were down more than 12%. You had the aggregate bond portfolio was down double digits. That's much steeper drop than the previous drops we've had before, which were around the 2 to 3% range. But I think a lot of what goes into your bond returns as we think about, investing for the future, there's the price action, how much it goes up and down, and how much yield you're earning. And if we look at what bonds are doing now, we can't predict what's going to happen with prices as interest rates go up and down, but you're being compensated much, much more than you were a year ago when interest rates were rock bottom and now are up in the 3 to 4% range. So the environment for investing is different now that we've had this pullback. And it's important to remember that there are some circumstances that could lead to better returns in the future.
Yeah, yeah, and we've talked about this before, and we continue to see treasury yields up over short term, really short term treasury yields up over 4%, kind of bumping up almost to that 4.5% range. So there is some good income, which the flip side of that, I think, is what really hurt us last year, is that we started from that zero interest rate environment. So when we saw that price depreciation happen last year in the bonds, there was no buffer. There was no yield there to buffer the returns. And that really did exacerbate the bond market returns last year more than has happened previous years. So that's just something to kind of bear in mind. So as we build that buffer back up, hopefully we won't have repeats of years like we did last year. But it is important that that yield plays multiple roles. And I think it's important. Another good reminder from last year.
Right. So we're going to deviate from a lot of the predictions that you hear coming out at the beginning of this year because, frankly, we don't know what's going to happen this year. And a 1-year time horizon is too short for anyone who has a financial plan to be making predictions over what happens in the markets. That's the truth. But we can talk about our mindset. How can we navigate tumultuous times and make sure that we come out of it having gotten a little bit better at what we need to do. So we settled on 4 words that we want to focus on this morning. So, and these are all things that are within your control. It's not saying I think the S&P is going to end up at this number on the year, interest rates are going to end up here. Those things are out of our control. The first word that we settled on was clarity. And we have to have clarity about our circumstances. And as we talk to clients over the last 12 months, the only way a year like last year makes sense is if you have a financial plan. If you don't have a plan and you're trying to figure out what's up, what's down, day-to-day movements, how the economy's doing this and the market's doing that, or vice versa, it doesn't make any sense unless you put it into the context of what really matters for your personal finances. What are your thoughts? I mean, that was the conversation we were having so much last year, right?
Absolutely. Last year was a big year for planning. And when we think about new clients that join our firm and decide that they want to work with us for their families, they're not coming to us because we're saying, hey, we're going to give you the best performance out there. They come to us because they're tired, they're exhausted of focusing on the wrong things, and they want that help to build the context in the form of financial plan to make sense of years like last year, to couple it with some of the boom years that came before, and how do those each play their own role in getting closer and closer to the financial goals of the family. And so building that context, that clarity is huge, and it's a great thing to focus on. It's a productive thing to focus on when the markets and economy around us are challenging.
There is a big discrepancy between people we talk to who have kind of embraced the financial planning process and people might come in and say, hey, I track my performance day to day. There's not a lot of peace and not a lot of clarity that goes into that.
Yeah.
The second word that we had was qualify. And what we mean by that is it's very easy to quantify your goals. We joke about, remember those commercials with the big orange number, people carrying around, this is my number that I need for retirement. It's X dollars. Or I'm going to retire at this age, 63, something like that. We think it's better to qualify some of those numbers. And I'm guilty as charged on this. I struggle with this side of it to say, how do we make sure that we're judging our success by whether we're living up to our potential? There's a former NFL coach, Tony Dungy. I was reading one of his comments recently where he talked about having to qualify your goals in terms of reaching your potential. Like, have I made myself better in order to become this person that I aspire to be? And that might be the next job you want to have, maybe better relationship with your family, but are the qualitative things that you can do as the quantitative things do as they're going to be and be volatile in the short term?
Yeah. You know, the other thing I love about thinking about it from the qualifying standpoint, or the quality of life, is that it's not so much the focus on the end state and getting to that quantity number. It's embracing all the activities and the journey and the trials and the lessons and the growth that happens along the way. And I think that's really important to reflect on too. Like during a year like last year, hopefully the right framework was brought forward where you could embrace the opportunities and recognize some of your own personal growth along the way. And I think that all ties back into that qualifying aspect.
Yes. And that leads into our third word, which is relationships. And this is something that's really underappreciated. There was a recent Wall Street Journal article on a Harvard study that's been going on since 1938 on the predictors of longevity. Is it avoiding high cholesterol or high blood pressure? Is it, having the right amount in your savings account? No, it was the quality of your relationships that you have. And what constitutes a healthy relationship with someone else? It's making sure you have the right expectations, that things are communicated effectively, you speak the same language. There's kind of aspirational elements of good relationships. Same thing goes with your relationship with money. But this is something where I think people don't necessarily embrace that as we age closer to retirement. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. Yeah. The relationships definitely play a key role. And I think it is fascinating to think about treating your relationship with money similar to how you treat your relationship with others. And in strong relationships, you don't abandon the person, you don't abandon the plan when things get challenging. That's when you look up and say, okay, what can I learn from that? How can I grow in that? And how can we get through this and find the positive opportunities coming out of this? I think that's a really interesting connection there between your relationships with people and your relationships with money, because they can both be very healthy. And I think there's lessons to learn on both sides.
Yep. And there are ups and downs that we have to weather, which brings us to our fourth word, which is progress. And last year tells us this, 2021 tells us this. How does financial progress look? Does it look like a straight line? Never does. The same is true of anything in life. Our careers were never a straight line. Our relationships were never a straight line. There's just no ticker symbol on them reporting at the end of the day how well they did and who's doing better, right? So we don't get that. So, how do we think about progress, big changes, little changes?
The analogy to straight lines too, I think it's a natural tendency for humans, for us to kind of seek that straight line and say, okay, I found my groove. But the risk is doing that in too short of a time period. And so when it comes to progress, I think the important thing, once again, is to take that step back and look at it in larger chunks. There might be productive things to do along the way, but they're all leading toward that slow and steady progress. And I think that's the other thing too, is accepting and embracing that progress may be slow and steady. It might not come as fast as you want it to. And the harder we try to push it, the more risk we can introduce.
I heard a great analogy recently. Somebody said, watching your portfolio performance day to day is like setting a webcam on the forest to watch the trees grow. You would never do that. You trust that the growth is happening at different stages, different times, and it's going to get there in the end, but you don't put a tracker on it. There's no doubt we are on the path of resistance now. Sometimes we can fool ourselves to think we're not, like a couple of years ago when everything was going up, but this is a path of resistance, also a path of learning. And I think that's what we really want to emphasize here, is that resolutions are fine. They're good to kind of set those near-term goals, but making that incremental progress year to year and tying that back financially to a plan that reflects you. That's the key. So let's talk about some things where we have some personal anecdotes on where we're trying to make progress this year. And I can start on this one because this was actually a tricky one for me. My family this year is going to take an extended vacation in the middle of the year, probably the longest we've been on in some time. It's just reaching that season of life where the kids are going to start going out into the world here pretty soon. So we want to capture that moment. But I was challenged by our coach, Steve Sandusky, who's been a great sounding board for us over the years. He asked kind of what the goals were for next year. And I happened to mention that was in the plans. And he said, when are you going? I don't know yet. So that's coming up pretty soon. Have you put it on the calendar? Nope, I have not. He said, well, then is it just another in a laundry list of things that you're going to do, or is it an actual priority for you? I thought, that's a really good point. Challenged me to, is that big rocks, you got to put the big rocks in first and then the small ones can fit. But if you put the small ones in first, the big ones don't fit. So that was a big rock for me and something to overcome. And as I think about my plans in years to come, that to me is progress, making sure you focus on the big rocks, because there are always, there's always variations there. How about you, Katie? What would be progress for you?
Mine's a little more subtle, I'm going to say. I think progress for me is more intentional check-ins, checking in on myself, kind of how I feel physically, mentally. Am I feeling healthy with the things that I'm building into my daily lifestyle? So that's kind of my personal side. And then on the relationship side, am I working on my relationships? Am I deepening relationships with my husband, Deke, and my children, Caleb and Amelia? Are we spending that quality time together? Because relationships can be tough, and because we're all changing in the process. So, I was
going to say, you're the only person I've ever heard say that figuring out marriage and parenthood is a subtle change.
Okay.
That's pretty aggressive. I'll be honest with you. So
I'm not getting to answers.
Oh, okay.
I don't think we're taking it that far. I'm looking for incremental improvement along the way.
You're qualifying it. There's no quantity there. I got it. Okay, good. Well, we'd love to talk to you about your plan. And if you have questions or need some perspective on the year that's been, or some conversation about how to think about the year that's to come, that's what we're here for. So we hope you have a prosperous and healthy 2023, and we look forward to seeing and hearing from all of you soon.
Take care.